Most people think the worst thing your family can hand you at a holiday dinner is a dish you didn't ask for. Mine handed me a contract. 19 pages on thick cream paper, clipped together with a gold binder clip, sitting right next to the turkey like it belonged there. There were 11 adults around that dining room table. A chandelier overhead that my mother had bought on clearance after my grandmother's funeral and never once considered taking down. They thought they knew exactly who I was. A recently divorced daughter. The dependable one. The one who never made waves. The agreeable sister who had spent 42 years making life easier for everyone else in the room. What they forgot, what they had always conveniently forgotten, is that I read legal documents for a living. By the time I reached for my pen, my mother had already stopped breathing normally. Welcome back to Calm Drama Story. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every single chance to do the right thing. They just chose different. Drop a comment below and make sure you're subscribed because you are going to want to stay on this porch. My name is Claire. I'm 42 years old. The time this all went down, I had been living in my own apartment for just under a year, which is roughly the amount of time it takes a woman to stop tensing up every time her phone rings with a number she recognizes. My place was a one-bedroom on the second floor of a building on Ashford Lane in Millbrook, Indiana, a town of about 11,000 people, one main square, and a blinking yellow light at the intersection of Route 7 and County Road 9 that nobody had bothered to fix since 2019. I'd signed my lease 2 weeks after my divorce was finalized. Rent was $695 a month. The bedroom ceiling sloped down on the left side. The heater in the bathroom rattled every February like it had something to confess. Kitchen window looked out over the laundromat below, and on Saturday mornings it smelled like warm fabric softener sheets. It was mine. Every single square foot of it. I worked as a document specialist at Kessler and Webb Family Law, a firm 3 blocks from the county courthouse on the square. My job, in its simplest form, was to read contracts, petitions, custody agreements, property settlements. I read things other people didn't want to. I noticed things other people hoped you'd miss. I had been doing it for 15 years and I was good at it the way some people are good at spotting a bad poker face, not because I practiced but because I had been trained by life. I had also, during my marriage, miscarried twice. My family had processed those losses the way they processed most inconvenient things, by quietly placing them in a box, sliding the box under the bed, and never mentioning it again. That particular brand of silence had cost me more than I'd ever said out loud. That November, I had a pot of chili on the stove and a stack of overdue bank statements spread across my kitchen table when my Aunt Rose called. Aunt Rose called every Thursday evening without fail, the way the sun rises, not because anyone asked it to, but because that's what it does. "Claire Bear," she said, "your mother's been very quiet this week." I told her Mom was probably just tired from work. "Honey," she said, "your mother does not do quiet. Your mother does preparation." I laughed. I stirred the chili. I told her she was reading into things. Rose had been reading weather, emotional weather, family weather, the kind that turns fast and drops hail, for 67 years. She could smell a shift coming from 3 counties over and a full week out. We talked about her tomatoes. We talked about whether the Henderson boy had really gotten engaged. Before she hung up, she said, "Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks, you know." I said I knew. She said, "I hope you're ready." In our family, that was not small talk. That was a weather advisory. Before I tell you what happened at that table, I need to back up a little so you understand the full picture. My sister Diane is 45. She's the kind of woman who runs a tight ship, the kind who color codes her planner, sends birthday cards 3 days early, and has never once in her life shown up anywhere without a plan B and a plan C already drafted in her head. She had been the hospital administrator at Millbrook Regional for 6 years. Matching coffee mugs on her desk. Staff appreciation lunches every quarter. Type who gives motivational speeches and genuinely means them. Diane and her husband Brandon had been trying to start a family for 11 years. 4 rounds of IVF. A number I later read in black ink on cream paper, $127,000, and some change like whoever typed it wanted you to feel the weight of every single dollar. A lot of that money came from an inheritance their grandmother had left them in 2020, with what Diane described as strong hopes attached. I had driven Diane home from her third egg retrieval. I had held her hand in a parking garage while she cried into a breakfast sandwich she couldn't even eat. I had genuinely, deeply grieved for her. You can grieve for someone and still say no to them. Those two things can coexist. Took me 42 years to believe that, but I believe it now. What I didn't know until my aunt told me, and I'm getting there, is that the conversation about me had already been happening for months. It had been happening in pantries and text threads and whispered phone calls between my mother and my sister on Tuesday nights when they both thought I was watching television and not thinking about my future. I had overheard a piece of it the previous Christmas. My mother's voice, low and careful, drifting out of the laundry room. She's not using her body for anything right now. She doesn't have any other plans. Her meaning me. My body. My plans. Or the absence of them, which apparently made me available for other people's. I had stood in the hallway holding a dish towel and swallowed that sentence like a pill that goes down sideways. It lodges. Doesn't go away. I didn't tell anyone. I filed it the way I file things at work, noted, organized, waiting. My mother called me on a Monday morning, which was the first red flag because my mother calls on Sundays. "Claire, sweetheart," she said. "Thanksgiving is at the house this year. Your father really wants to see you." My father, Ray, had not specifically requested to see me in over a year. My father was a quiet man who expressed affection through lawn maintenance and being in the same room. He didn't request things. He nodded at them. "The whole family will be here," she continued. "Brandon's coming, of course. Uncle Frank is flying in from Denver." Uncle Frank. He wasn't technically my uncle. He was my father's older cousin, a family attorney in Colorado, semi-retired. He showed up at maybe one gathering every 3 years. He had never once flown in from Denver for Thanksgiving. I wrote the words Uncle Frank, Denver on the notepad on my kitchen counter. I underlined it twice. "It'll just be a nice, relaxed dinner," my mother said. "Nothing stressful." The word relaxed. I wrote that down too. In our family, nothing stressful has preceded every difficult conversation, every major ask, and at least one situation that ended with someone not speaking to someone else for 4 years. After I hung up, I stood at my kitchen sink and let the water run over my hands for a long moment. I counted the cars I expected to see in that driveway. I thought about Denver. I thought about my aunt's voice on Thursday. "I hope you're ready." I called Rose back. "I think we need to talk before Thanksgiving," I said. "I've already got coffee on," she said. "Come Saturday." That is how the women in my family agree to go to war, quietly over coffee with something baking in the oven. I opened my laptop that night. I pulled up the surrogacy contract templates in the firm's digital library. I read for 2.5 hours. I took notes in a spiral-bound notebook I'd had since 2021 that still had courtroom observation notes from a seminar in Cincinnati where a family court judge had stood at a whiteboard and drawn a diagram of what coercive contract language looks like from the outside versus the inside. "You'll know it when you see it," he'd said. "You'll see it on page 2 or page 4. It's never on page 1. Page 1 is always the pretty part." My Aunt Rose lives 14 miles outside of Millbrook on a property she and her late husband bought in 1987. He passed in 2014, and she has been running that land, a half-dozen raised vegetable beds, a greenhouse full of orchids, and 40-some years of accumulated wisdom, entirely on her own ever since. Rose grows orchids the way other women keep journals. Quietly, patiently, with complete attention and no need for an audience. I drove out Saturday morning. She had coffee poured before I even got my coat off, and a pie on the counter that smelled like cinnamon and apples, and every conversation I'd ever needed to have in her kitchen. "Your mother called me Wednesday," she said, setting a mug in front of me. "She asked me very casually if I thought you had ever given serious thought to surrogacy." I put my mug down. I told her I thought that was a conversation you'd long since closed, Rose said. She said, well, Rose, families evolve. She looked at me with those steady gray eyes of hers. Families don't evolve, Claire. People just get braver about what they wanted all along. Then she told me something I had never heard before. She told me about a summer when she was 21. About a choice her own mother had made for her, or tried to, before she'd had the chance to make it herself. She had kept that story inside for over 50 years. She delivered it at a kitchen table on a Saturday morning over apple pie like it was something she had been waiting to give me specifically. When I stood up to go, she held my hand at the door for a moment. Whatever they put in front of you, she said, read it. Don't just listen. Read every word. I told her I would. Pay attention to page 4, she said. That's always where they keep the real thing. Thanksgiving. 2:30 in the afternoon. I pulled into my parents' driveway in Millbrook 20 minutes early because I wanted to count the cars before anyone saw me arrive. My father's truck, my mother's Camry, Diane's Subaru, Brandon's pickup, and a silver rental sedan with a sticker from Indianapolis International, which meant Uncle Frank had driven it in from wherever he'd flown into, and he had not mentioned this trip to me once. 5 cars for what had been described to me as a cozy family dinner. I sat in my Honda for 2 full minutes. I breathed evenly. I thought of my aunt's voice, page 4. Then I got out, walked up the porch steps past a pair of mums my mother had set out that morning, and rang the bell. My mother opened the door before the second ring. She hugged me the way she used to hug me when I was 9 years old and had just won something. Sweetheart, she said. The word sweetheart had not been used since she wanted me to reconsider my divorce attorney. Inside, the chandelier was blazing at 2:30 in the afternoon. The dining room smelled like stuffing and something floral that came from a candle my mother had probably bought specifically for today. Diane was in the kitchen archway, wearing a cream-colored blouse I recognized from her 10-year anniversary dinner, a blouse she reserved for occasions when she needed to look soft while asking for something hard. Brandon extended his hand with a handshake that felt like a man rehearsing something he didn't fully believe. He gave me a tight, close-mouthed smile and looked immediately at a point somewhere past my shoulder. Uncle Frank was in the armchair by the window. 60-something, reading glasses perched on his nose, a glass of water in one hand. He stood when I came in, a lawyer's reflex, and said, "Claire, good to see you," in a voice that meant he had prepared for this day. And then I saw it. On the sideboard, next to the turkey platter and the cranberry sauce, there was a folder. Cream-colored. Thick. A gold binder clip on the corner, perfectly aligned. Someone had taken care to position that clip just so. Someone had wanted it to look like it belonged there, like it was part of the meal. In the living room, Diane's 7-year-old niece from Brandon's side of the family, a girl named Paige, was parked in front of an animated movie at a volume carefully calibrated to cover conversation from the dining room. My mother had placed her there on purpose. Paige would not hear what was coming. You know what it means when a family arranges the children to not overhear. We sat down. My mother at one end, my father at the other. Diane and Brandon across from me. Uncle Frank 2 seats down, spaced at a distance that was meant to feel casual but was actually calculated. Me alone on my side, the way a defendant sits at the wrong table. My father said grace. My mother passed the turkey. We talked about the weather. We talked about a road closure on Route 7. Diane didn't touch her wine. Brandon's knee bounced under the table in a rhythm I clocked at about twice per second. My mother's eyes flicked to the sideboard every 90 seconds or so, checking on the folder like it might have moved. I ate. I waited. I had learned from 15 years of depositions that the person who breaks the silence first usually loses ground. My mother cleared her throat at exactly 12 minutes in. "Claire, honey, your sister and Brandon have been thinking about something. Something we as a family want to talk to you about together. 'Cause that's what we do. We talk." I set my fork down. I smiled the smile I keep for firm holiday parties. "Course," I said. "I'm listening." Diane reached toward the sideboard. She did not look at me. Brandon looked at his plate. My mother's hands disappeared under the table into her lap, which is the tell she has had since 1998. She does it when she's about to say something she has rehearsed. Uncle Frank took a long, slow sip of his water and did not put the glass down. My mother spoke for 3 minutes without stopping once, which told me she had practiced the whole thing out loud at least 5 times. She talked about family. She said the word family 8 times, I counted. She talked about Diane's journey. She used the word journey 4 times. She talked about the miracle of modern medicine. She talked about love. Then it was Diane's turn. She had a tear ready in her left eye. Just one, which I recognized as the efficient version. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Claire," she said, "you are the only person in this world who can give me this." And there it was. The sentence that in my family has always meant, "You're the only one we haven't already used up." Gestational surrogacy, my mother said softly. A gift between sisters. The most beautiful kind of gift. Brandon nodded, eyes still down. My father nodded. Uncle Frank set his glass on the table. I looked at my sister. I looked at my mother. I looked at the folder on the sideboard. I said, "I'd like a minute to understand exactly what's being asked. Can I see what you've put together?" My mother's face shifted. The soft expression dropped like a key out of a pocket. Her jaw set. "Now listen," she stopped herself, reset, then pressed forward. "Claire, your sister opened her home to you when you had nothing. 6 weeks, a roof, meals. You owe her." The word owe. She said it with the exact same tone she'd used when I was 15 and forgot to return something I'd borrowed. Like the currency between us had always been running, and I'd never been told the balance. I looked at my father. He looked at the tablecloth. I said, "I'd like to read whatever you've prepared before we talk further." Brandon, very quietly, without lifting his head, said, "Let her read it." Diane's head turned toward him by about 2 degrees and stopped. Something moved behind her eyes. I filed it. I reached for the folder. "Now, I want to be honest with you. There are 2 kinds of moments in any difficult situation. There's the moment where you feel everything, the hurt, the disbelief, the decades worth of being the agreeable one, and then there is the moment where the training kicks in. Where 15 years of reading the thing nobody wants you to read takes over and you are just a professional doing a job. That was the moment I opened the folder. 19 pages. Thick cream cardstock, the kind you order from a print shop. Not a home printer, a print shop. Someone had paid for this paper. Someone had wanted it to feel official. The title page read, "Altruistic Gestational Surrogacy Agreement between Diane Marie Hartfield, intended mother, and blank line gestational carrier." They had left the blank line for my signature. They had not filled in my name. That detail alone told me everything I needed to know about what they expected from me that evening. "Oh, honey, you don't have to read all of that," my mother said with a little laugh. Uncle Frank had it looked at. "It's completely standard." I looked at Uncle Frank. Uncle Frank looked at the centerpiece. "I read for a living, Mom," I said pleasantly. "I'd like to read this." "We're not turning a Thanksgiving dinner into a deposition," she said, and her voice had an edge like a can lid. Brandon said again, still quietly, "Let her read it." I flattened the spine of the document with the heel of my hand and began. Page 1 was architecture. Cathedral ceilings of language. Generosity, gift, love, family, miracle. The word altruistic appeared 5 times before I turned the page, which in my line of work is exactly 4 times more than any honest document needs it to appear. Whereas the intended mother has undergone 4 unsuccessful attempts at in vitro fertilization, totaling $127,412. Diane flinched at the number. I kept my face neutral. I kept reading. Page 2 was where the money showed up, and money, in my experience, is where altruism begins to perspire. There were reimbursable expenses. $4,500 per trimester for maternity clothing, paid directly to Diane. $850 a month for dietary supplements, paid into an account in Diane's name. Mileage to and from appointments, logged and paid into an account in Diane's name. Clinic parking fees. Meal allowances on appointment days capped at $22. Not $1 in that section flowed to me. Not one. But I kept reading. All medical communications pertaining to the gestational carrier's prenatal care, testing, and clinical recommendations shall be directed to and received by the intended mother on behalf of the gestational carrier. I read it twice. On behalf of me. My own medical information. My own doctor's calls. My own test results. All of it routed to my sister first. I would not be receiving my own healthcare information. Legally, under this document, I would be a room in a building my sister held the lease on. 3 years before this Thanksgiving, I had sat in a hotel conference room in Cincinnati for a legal continuing education seminar. A family court judge from Columbus, a woman named Hartley who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, had stood at a whiteboard and used a specific phrase. She had written it in blue marker in capital letters. Structural coercion. You won't feel it when you first read it, she'd said. It looks like standard language. But you'll notice it on page 2, the point where the document stops describing an agreement and starts describing a transfer of authority. I had written that down in a notebook I still keep on my office shelf. I was on page 2. I had noticed it. I turned to page 3. My mother had begun to relax slightly. She picked up her wine. Diane had uncrossed and recrossed her legs. Uncle Frank had started studying the tablecloth like it owed him a favor. Page 3 was where they came for my body by brand name. Mandatory diet plan. Mandatory weekly weight check. Mandatory bed rest at any point the intended mother's physician, not mine, recommended it. Prenatal vitamins, brand specified. Novanatal daily packets, no substitutions without written consent of the intended mother. Travel restriction, no driving more than 90 minutes from my home address without written authorization from my sister. Bi-weekly psychological counseling sessions with a therapist selected by the intended mother. And then Clause 8. The gestational carrier agrees to abstain from all elective medical decisions without prior written authorization from the intended mother. My thumbnail pressed into the margin of the page. Just a small crescent. A habit from 15 years of marking documents for review. Let me tell you something about the word altruistic. Altruistic is a word that owns a nice blazer and sensible shoes. It will sit across from you at a Thanksgiving table, help itself to stuffing, and look you dead in the eye while its other hand slides across the tablecloth toward your autonomy and a 6-figure indemnification clause. Altruism, in my experience, is what greed calls itself when it wants to be photographed. I said none of that out loud. I said it only in the kitchen of my own head, where my Aunt Rose was standing by the window with a spray bottle, nodding. Look, it's very standard, Diane said into the silence. Claire, it's just standard language. Right, Uncle Frank? Uncle Frank cleared his throat. It's all negotiable, of course. He said negotiable the way a man says it when he has already been paid and the negotiating is not in his interest. I turned the page. Page 4. My aunt's voice, patient and certain. Page 4 is always where they keep the real thing. I breathed in. I pressed the crease flat. I read. Clause 10. 12 words. Upon implantation, the gestational carrier irrevocably waives all parental rights to the embryo, fetus, and resulting child. Someone had underlined the word irrevocably. With a pen. By hand. A careful, deliberate line underneath a word in a printed document, as if they needed that word to land harder than the rest. Someone had felt that emphasis was necessary. I pressed my thumbnail into the margin beside it. I kept reading. Clause 11. The intended mother retains sole authority to select embryo characteristics, including genetic sex, and reserves the right, at her sole discretion, to request termination of the pregnancy prior to 24 weeks gestation, should genetic screening results fall outside preferred parameters. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I sat very still for a moment. Termination of carriage. Preferred parameters. Sole discretion. This contract, this document printed on 19 pages of cardstock, placed on a sideboard next to a turkey, handed to me with a smile and a single practiced tear, contained a clause giving my sister the right to decide unilaterally whether to end a pregnancy in my body based on whether the baby met her specifications. It wasn't a gift. It was a rental agreement with a return window. I raised my eyes slowly across the table. Not to Diane. To Brandon. Brandon had gone the color of old dishwater. His mouth was slightly open. His hand was pressed flat against the table like he was trying to study something. Maybe the furniture, maybe himself, maybe the version of his marriage he still wanted to believe in. I looked at my sister. She was waiting for me to finish reading. Her expression had not changed. She was not surprised by Clause 11. She already knew it was there. My father, for the first time all evening, was looking directly at me. Not at the table. Not at the chandelier. At me. His face was unreadable, but his hands were flat on the tablecloth, and there was something in the way his shoulders had fallen that told me he had seen this document before today. That he had read it, or had it explained to him, and had said nothing. Not to me. Not even a phone call. I filed that too. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. In the living room, Paige laughed at the movie, bright, clear, oblivious, the laugh of a child who doesn't know what rooms feel like when all the air goes out of them. I turned to page 5. Clause 12. And there it was. The thing all the other pages had been built around. The reason for the cardstock, the print shop, Uncle Frank's flight from Denver, the word O at a Thanksgiving table. In the event the gestational carrier withdraws her agreement to proceed at any point following the execution of this document, she shall be liable for the full reimbursement of all prior IVF-related costs incurred by the intended parents, totaling $127,412, plus reasonable attorney's fees. Down to the dollar. Down to the 12 cents. They had not rounded. They had written every digit. Someone had wanted those digits to land exactly as heavy as they were. I thought about what I owned. My apartment. My 6-year-old Honda. My savings from the divorce settlement, about $14,000 I had protected carefully for 11 months. My job. My wages. All of it legally collectible after my signature if I ever said no for any reason at any point after signing this document. They had not asked me to be a surrogate. They had asked me to sign myself into a corner from which no future no would ever be free. Every no forever would cost me everything I had. I looked down at the page. I thought of something the judge in Cincinnati had said, almost as an aside, near the end of the seminar. The most sophisticated coercion documents, she'd said, are the ones that don't feel coercive until you're already inside them. By then, the door's already behind you. I had not stepped inside. I had not signed anything. I was still on the outside of the door. I set the document flat on the table in front of me. I reached into my purse. In my purse was a blue fine-point pen that my Aunt Rose had given me the previous Christmas. She'd pressed it into my hand outside the church and said, "For the documents, honey. The important ones." I uncapped it. Click was louder than it had any right to be at a dinner table. My mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. I found clause 11. I drew a circle around it. Slow, even pressure. Kind of circle I draw at work around clauses that need to go in front of a judge. Clean. Professional. Unmistakable. Then I set the pen diagonally across the folder the way you mark a reviewed document in evidence protocol. I closed the folder. I slid it back across the tablecloth with both hands the way you return something that was never really yours to begin with. I stood up. The room went the kind of quiet that has texture to it. My mother made a small sound. Diane's mouth opened. Brandon went completely still. Uncle Frank set his glass down. My father's eyes closed slowly, like he was bracing for something he had known was coming. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to know that. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I had spent 15 years reading other people's worst documents in hallways outside courtrooms, and I had learned from every one of them that the moment you let your voice go unsteady is the moment the other side stops hearing your words and starts counting your weaknesses. I won't be signing this, I said. And I won't be discussing it further tonight. I want everyone at this table to understand that I read every word, I heard everything that was said, and I won't be forgetting either one. I picked up my purse. I walked around the table to my father. I put my hand on his shoulder and kissed the top of his head because my Aunt Rose once told me in her greenhouse in February that dignity is the one thing you cannot take back once you spend it, so don't spend it on the people who already spent theirs. My father's shoulder was stiff under my hand. He did not look up. I walked to the front door. In the living room, Paige was watching her movie. She didn't turn around. She didn't know anything was different. I was glad. I opened the door. I stepped out. I closed it behind me with one hand, quietly, no slam. As I walked down the porch steps, I heard my sister make a sound through the door. Not a cry. Something lower. Something that had stopped pretending. I did not turn around. I had been asked to give her a child. I gave her my silence instead. And my silence, as it turned out, was louder than anything I could have said. I drove home at exactly the speed limit, which in my family is what people do when they're furious and don't want anyone to know how much. My phone started going off before I hit the main road. Diane, voicemail. My mother, voicemail. My father, please come back. Your mom is very upset. Another text from my mother. This isn't how we handle things as a family, Claire. And then the one I noticed most, nothing from Uncle Frank. Not a single message. A lawyer going quiet after something like that is its own kind of answer. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat. I turned the radio up. I found an oldies station playing Dolly Parton and I let Dolly handle the rest of the drive. I didn't go home yet. I drove past the blinking yellow at Route 7, kept going, took the county road 14 miles out. Rose's porch light was on. She opened the door before I knocked and had the kettle going before I sat down. It was 9:20 at night. The orchids on her kitchen windowsill caught the overhead light. Place smelled like cinnamon from the pie she'd apparently made that afternoon. I told her everything. The folder on the sideboard. The thank you speech my mother had memorized. The single tear my sister had ready. Uncle Frank and his melting ice. Clause 11. Clause 12. The number typed to the penny. I told her I had drawn a circle and walked out. She listened without interrupting once. Her hands were folded on the table. When I finished, she said, "You did right." I said, "Did I?" She said, "Yes." She poured us both tea. Then she said, "But it's not over yet, Claire." I looked up. Diane printed 19 pages of cardstock and paid a man from Denver to fly in. She's going to need a story about why it didn't work. And the story she tells will not be about the contract. I said, "What will she do?" My aunt looked at me. "She'll post something. She's her mother's daughter. Give her 48 hours. I stared at my tea. "I photocopied it," I said after a long moment. "Contract. I made a copy at the office the Friday before Thanksgiving. I had a feeling." Rose smiled, small and slow, the way the sun comes up in November. Not dramatic, but absolutely certain. "Claire," she said, "you have always been your own aunt. My friend and coworker Tanya is the kind of woman who shows up with supplies. When I texted her that Sunday morning, 'I need help redacting a document tonight,' she replied within 4 minutes, 'On my way. Bringing Sharpies and snacks.' 'How scorched are we going?' I said, 'Not scorched. Professional.' She said, 'Even better.' She arrived at 7 with a pack of wide-tip black markers, a bag of chips, and a bottle of wine she set on the counter with the energy of someone who had been waiting for an assignment like this her whole career. We spread the photocopy across my kitchen table. All 19 pages, cream cardstock rendered in bright office copy white. We worked methodically, page by page. Every name redacted. Every address redacted. Every signature block redacted. The law firm's letterhead redacted. Uncle Frank's initials on page 2 redacted. Both their names, everywhere they appeared, gone. What we left visible, every clause number. Every word of coercion. The phrase altruistic gestational surrogacy agreement. The word irrevocably. The phrase sole discretion. The phrase preferred parameters. The phrase termination of carriage. And the number $127,412. We did not round it. They hadn't rounded it. Neither did we. At 11 o'clock, I drafted a statement. I gave myself 200 words. I did not mention my sister. I did not mention my family. I did not mention Millbrook, Indiana, or the sideboard or the turkey that had been sitting next to the folder all evening. I wrote, "This is a gestational surrogacy contract I was presented with at a family dinner, printed on cardstock, and asked to sign that same evening without independent legal counsel. I am a legal document specialist. I recognize the language on page 4 as coercive. I am sharing this document, fully redacted of all identifying information, because I believe other women need to know what this kind of language looks like. Please read Clause 11. Tanya read it once. Then again. Helena, she said. She always calls me by my middle name when she's being serious. That is the most professional ambush I have ever seen. Thank you, I said. By midnight we had 19 pages of black bars, one circled clause and one number, $127,412, left visible in full because numbers in my 15 years of reading documents are the only part of a contract that cannot hide behind nice language. The morning after Thanksgiving I hit post. Facebook at 8. LinkedIn at 8:15. An anonymous legal advice forum thread at 8:30. No tags. No names. The redacted PDF attached. My 200 words. I made a second cup of coffee. I went to work. By noon, the Facebook post had over 800 shares. By Friday afternoon, 6,000. And that's when a new player entered the game, someone I hadn't expected. A woman named Dr. Pamela Voigt, a reproductive rights attorney in Indianapolis who I had never heard of, shared the post on her professional LinkedIn with the caption, "This is exactly why independent counsel in surrogacy agreements is not optional. This document is a masterclass in structural coercion. Every woman should know what page 4 looks like." That post alone got tens of thousands of views over the weekend. Podcast out of Chicago reached out. A family law reporter from the Indianapolis Star sent an email. I forwarded everything to Tanya. "Handle the media," I texted. "I'm going to make soup." She texted back, "Already drafted your no-comment statement. Go make your soup." In Millbrook, things moved faster. A woman named Brenda posted in a local Facebook group, "I recognize the dollar figure in this contract from something my neighbor mentioned. I don't know what to say." Another person, "I work at Millbrook Regional. I think I know who this is." A third, who had apparently gone to school with Diane, "This cannot be her. She's on the PDA board." By Sunday evening, 3 days after Thanksgiving, Diane's original Facebook post about a family member's painful choice had disappeared. My mother's res hair had disappeared 40 minutes after that. Uncle Frank blocked me on 3 platforms. A message came in on Friday from a woman I didn't know, a foster mom named Carol in a neighboring county, who had seen the post and shared it with a comment, "I have been a foster parent for 11 years. This is why the children in my care need advocates who can read the paperwork." She left her email. I wrote it down. I didn't know yet why that detail mattered. I would. On Tuesday evening, 6 days after Thanksgiving, someone knocked on my apartment door. Brandon. He was still in his work clothes. Gray slacks, company polo, the lanyard from his medical equipment job still looped around his neck. He wasn't holding anything. No flowers, no excuse. I didn't invite him in. I didn't close the door either. I'm not here to defend her, he said. I want you to know that first. I waited. I should have said something at that table, he said. I knew what was in that document before we drove over. I knew on page 3. I knew before page 3, honestly. He looked at his shoes. Your mother drafted most of Clause 11. He said it quietly, like saying it quietly made it easier. She told Diane it was, she called it leverage. She said if you had a way out, you'd take it and they needed to close the way out. I let that sit for a moment. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He finally looked up. 'Cause I've been married to Diane for 14 years, he said. And I sat at that table last Thursday and I realized I do not actually know who she is. I nodded. Thank you for telling me, I said. You should probably say it to yourself too. Out loud. In the car on the way home. Not for me, for you. He blinked. He nodded once. He went down the stairwell. I heard him standing there for about a minute. I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. I put the kettle on. Brandon was checked into the Millbrook Marriott by Thursday. Tanya told me, Tanya knows everything in a town of 11,000 within 36 hours. It's a skill and a gift and I rely on it entirely. My sister called on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Not a voicemail. She called and when I answered, her voice wasn't broken. It was furious. You destroyed my marriage, she said. I was standing at my kitchen counter. I did not sit down for this conversation. No, Diane, I said. I didn't destroy your marriage. You wrote Clause 11 with our mother. I just read it out loud. Silence. You are a vindictive person, she said. I want you to know that. I thought about every story she told about me at family dinners over the years. Every time she'd quietly confirmed someone else's version of who I was. Every Christmas she'd sat across from me while our mother narrated my failures like a documentary she'd produced herself. I thought about 2 miscarriages nobody had ever properly grieved with me. I thought about all of it. And I said, goodbye, Diane. I hung up. A family like ours is like a pie crust that's been overworked. You can't put it back together once it cracks. There's no amount of ice water that fixes it. You just have to start with new dough. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be clear about that. I felt tired in the specific way you feel tired after doing something you should have done a decade ago and didn't, and the weight of all those years you waited comes due at once. I poured water over a tea bag. No, Diane, I thought. You put Clause 11 on page 4. I just used a pen. Before I tell you what my father said to me the following Sunday, the first genuinely honest thing I had heard from him in over 40 years, I want to say something to you directly. If someone in your life is trying to make your no impossible, through a document, through guilt, through a version of history they wrote without your input, you are allowed to read it slowly. You are allowed to draw a circle around the part that isn't right. You are allowed to hand it back. And you are allowed to leave. 2 Sundays after Thanksgiving, my father knocked on my apartment door alone. No coat. No, my mother. My father had not come to my apartment alone in the entire 11 months I'd lived there. My father did not go places alone. I let him in. I pointed at the second-hand couch. I made coffee. He sat with his hands on his knees the way he sits in church. I read what you posted, he said. 3 times. I waited. Your mother has been telling me all week that you were being selfish, being ungrateful. And he stopped. I nodded, Claire. For 42 years I've been sitting at that table and nodding. His voice had a small shake in it that I had never heard before, and that was unmistakably not performance. I knew about the contract, he said. I knew 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I should have called you. I didn't answer. There wasn't an answer that didn't cost something. I'm telling your mother tonight, he said, that I won't be at any table where something like that folder is allowed. I wanted you to know before I told her. We drank coffee together for 14 minutes. I counted. It was the longest real conversation we had ever had. Time moved. Summer came and went. My apartment got light until 9 in the evenings. I learned to bake sourdough, badly at first, then less badly, then well enough that Tanya asked me to bring it to the office. 3 months after Thanksgiving, my father quietly moved out of the master bedroom into the guest room. He didn't move out of the house. He didn't announce it. He simply relocated himself, one box at a time, the way quiet men make the only move they can still make. My mother did not comment on it publicly. She posted once more on Facebook, nothing specific, just something about difficult seasons and trusting the process. Then she went quiet, which, as my aunt had predicted, was louder than anything else she could have done. Diane did not renew her contract as hospital administrator at Millbrook Regional. The board had received in April a significant amount of community feedback following a social media post they declined to name specifically. The official statement cited a change in administrative direction. 3 members of the board privately told people who told Tanya. I did not celebrate. I want to be clear about that. A woman losing her job is not a win. It's a consequence, and consequences belong to the people who make choices, not to the people who read the paperwork. One Saturday in September, Tanya and I were at a diner on Route 7, splitting a piece of peach pie. She said, offhand, stirring her coffee, "Have you ever seriously thought about foster care? 11 months since Thanksgiving. 11 months of quiet, careful, slow rebuilding. 11 months of being a person in a room I chose to be in." And here was the question I had not been allowed to ask myself. I started the home study that October. Foster to adopt, through the county. My caseworker was named Joanne Reinhardt, 54 years old, a former high school guidance counselor who had pivoted to foster placement 15 years earlier and who clicked her pen when she was thinking in a way I found immediately deeply reassuring. She was the kind of woman who had seen everything and remained, somehow, genuinely hopeful. I filled out every form twice. I read every placement policy document with the same attention I would have given Clause 11. I did not take chances. I told Rose first. She cried into a dish towel at her kitchen sink and then composed herself and said, "I'll need to put up a second shelf for the orchids." I told my father next. He said, "Tell me the dates. I want to come to whatever I'm allowed to." I did not tell my mother. I did not tell my sister. The branch of my family that had tried to rent my body was not going to be told about the daughter I was working to find. 14 months after Thanksgiving. A Tuesday in February. County Services Building, 2nd floor. Gray industrial carpet, overhead fluorescents, afternoon light coming through the west-facing windows. Good, warm, real light. She was 4 years old. She was wearing a yellow dress with a small butterfly on the pocket. Her sneakers had purple laces that someone, Carol, her foster mom, I learned later, had let her pick out herself from a dollar bin at a drugstore because Carol was the kind of woman who understood that small choices matter when a child doesn't get to make many big ones. Her hair was in 2 low pigtails, a little crooked, done by Carol that morning. Her name was Maya. Joanne had told me ahead of time that Maya was observant, that she watched people carefully before she decided anything, that she did not warm up quickly, and that this was not a flaw. I had brought a stuffed elephant, a floppy-eared gray thing with one slightly crooked eye that I had found at a thrift store in a neighboring town on a Saturday when I'd spent over an hour touching every stuffed animal on the shelf and putting each one back down. I'd driven 25 minutes home with it on the passenger seat. I knelt down when Joanne brought her in. Not too close. Not too fast. "Hi," I said. "My name's Claire. I brought you something. Do you like elephants?" Maya looked at the elephant. She looked at me. She considered both of us with the gravity of a small person who knows that looking is free but deciding costs something. Then she said, "It's soft." I said, "I know." She took it. She held it by one ear. She didn't smile, not exactly, but she did a thing with her face that was not a smile and also not a smile. Private calculation made public by about 2 millimeters. Joanne's eyes were wet. She clicked her pen once and looked away. I did not know yet that by spring Maya would call me Mom in a voice so matter-of-fact it would rearrange every room in my chest. I only knew, sitting on that gray carpet, that something I had spent 42 years not being allowed to hope for was beginning to happen. 8 months later. County Courthouse, 2nd floor, the week before Christmas. Judge Marble Hartwell. Mid-60s, silver hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain. She had done 4 adoptions that week. Ours was the last appointment of the afternoon. Present in the small courtroom. Me. Maya, 4.5, in a red plaid dress that had never been worn before, carrying her elephant. My Aunt Rose in a deep green coat, the kind of coat you wear when something permanent is happening. My father Ray, who had driven himself and arrived 6 minutes early and stood in the hallway until I came. Tanya in the back row with her phone out for photos. Joanne in professional gray, still clicking her pen. Carol, Maya's foster mom, who had texted me in October to ask if she could come, and whom I had said yes to immediately, sitting beside Joanne with red eyes that she had clearly been managing since the parking lot. Sent pointedly, my mother. My sister. Uncle Frank. None of them had been invited. None of them had tried to come. Judge Hartwell spoke the way judges speak at adoption hearings when they have done it enough times to understand they are officiating something sacred disguised as paperwork. She looked at Maya over her reading glasses. Are you ready to officially be Maya Ellison? Maya nodded once very seriously. Yes. The judge smiled. She signed. Tanya took 17 photographs in 12 seconds. Carol cried without trying to hide it. My father made a sound I had never heard him make. In the hallway afterward, Rose handed me a small terracotta pot with a white orchid in it, tight green bud not yet open. She'll need one of her own, she said. My father picked Maya up. She let him. She put her cheek against his shoulder with the total, non-negotiable trust of a child who has decided you are safe. And when a child like Maya decides you are safe, it is the most earned thing you have ever received. He said to her very quietly, "Hello, granddaughter." I looked at my aunt. I did the opposite of what they wanted, I said. I became a mother without any of them. Rose squeezed my hand. No, honey, she said. You became a mother because of what you refused. Those are not the same thing. I held the orchid. I watched my father rock my daughter gently in the courthouse hallway light. Thanksgiving, someone had placed a folder on a sideboard and called it a gift. What they were actually offering was a cage with nice wallpaper. I read every page. I drew a circle around the worst of it. I handed it back. And then I went and built something real. It's a Saturday morning now. The sun comes through the kitchen window the way it does in this apartment, at a low angle particular to this building, to this floor, to this exact window above the laundromat. It's the light I moved into. It's mine. Maya is at the table with a picture book about a rabbit who loses a mitten and finds it and puts it back on. She is narrating it to herself in the solemn, serious voice she uses when she is being an expert. The orchid my aunt gave her at the courthouse is on the windowsill. It has bloomed twice now. I pour water over a tea bag. Think about contracts. I think about cardstock and sideboard tables and the word altruistic and what it costs when you let people define that word for you. I think about my Aunt Rose in her kitchen, 14 miles out, orchids on every sill, telling me a story she'd carried for 50 years so I wouldn't have to carry a version of it myself. I think about what it means to be a kind woman versus a soft one. Kind woman is not the same as a soft woman. A soft woman bends until someone else's shape is the only shape she remembers. A kind woman makes a deliberate choice every morning to not become the people who hurt her. I made that choice at 42. I make it again every day. My daughter looks up from her rabbit book. Mom, she says, the rabbit found it. I know, I said. Good for the rabbit. She nods, satisfied, and goes back to her narration. If there's a folder in your life right now, if someone is handing you their wish wrapped up in language you haven't had time to read, I want you to know something. You are allowed to slow down. You are allowed to read page 4. You are allowed to draw a circle around the part that isn't right. And you are allowed to stand up, pick up your purse, and walk out the door, quietly, no slam, and drive home at exactly the speed limit with the radio up. The folder will still be there on their sideboard. You don't have to be. This story hit somewhere real for you tonight. If you've ever been handed a contract disguised as a gift, or told that a no was going to cost you everything, or been the agreeable one in a room full of people counting on you to stay that way, drop the word orchid in the comments below. I'll know. And if you know the woman in your life who taught you to read page 4, leave her name. She deserves to be said out loud. Tap subscribe if you haven't yet. I've got another story coming next week, about a mother-in-law, a property deed, and a key she genuinely did not expect me to make a copy of. Come back. I'll have the kettle on.